You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
Ever notice how life's best stories don't happen in your living room? They happen on the open road, out on the water, or parked under the stars. At Progressive, they get that you want to focus on the experience, not worry about the what-ifs. That's why they offer quality insurance designed for your ride, whether that's a boat, RV, or motorcycle. Adventure with confidence. Visit Progressive.com and see how easy it is to protect your favorite way to get away. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in D.C. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Islanders, gather around the fire pit because it's time for Love Island Lessons. I'm Talia, host of Dating Intentionally, and each week I'm breaking down the moments, interactions, and relationship dynamics from the villa that can teach us about modern dating in real life. You don't need to watch the show to get something out of this episode. Think of Love Island as one giant dating experiment that gives us examples of what works, what doesn't, and why so many of us make the same mistakes when dating. Today, I'm talking about week 4 of Love Island USA season 8. That's episode 16 to 21. So if you're not caught up and you don't want any spoilers, this is your warning that there are spoilers in this episode. So just to set the stage, this week was Casa Amor week. So all the established couples were split up and got a chance to, quote, test their connection and meet new people so they can decide if they want to stay with their original person or couple off with someone new. This plot device causes maximum drama, and I love it. It's so fun to watch, and there's so much to learn here. All right, lesson number 1. If you keep score, you're going to lose. So this is about Anaya and Casey, who had a lot of heat this week. They had a huge falling out at the recoupling, which was last night. I'm recording this on Saturday. And, Casey coupled up with Tierra, TT from Casa Amor, and Anaya stayed loyal to Casey. And Anaya had this big speech about how many times she picked Casey, and Casey was still butthurt about not being picked from night 1. But my whole thing is, like, weren't they just a default pick couple? Neither of them were picked. They were just kind of shoved together in the beginning. So I'm not sure why Casey keeps coming back to that. Anyway, I'm not keeping track of how many times and who's picking who on the show. But from what I remember, as someone who's been watching the show and taking notes, they've been pretty focused on each other from the moment they were put together by default. They both decided to continue their connection and get to know each other instead of exploring with other people and getting to know the bombshells or anyone else that came into the villa. They had chances to do that, okay? Even though Soul was wrapped up with Sincere, Casey could have been more aggressive with that. And Anaya could have gotten to know Sean if she wanted to before he left. Anyway, in this moment when Casey brought TT back to the fire pit and Anaya has her whole speech and then it breaks out into this big fight, they're so caught up in keeping score, it makes it hard for them, especially Anaya, to just see that they're not a match. It just doesn't matter in the end because they are just not a match. If you're listening to this, I will say you've probably not been on a reality dating show like Love Island, but maybe you've experienced scorekeeping in relationships, like who initiates dates or who's planning dates, who says I love you first or who says it more, who initiates sex more and stuff like that. I've been guilty of this too, but the second it pops up, know that what's really going on is a lot deeper than the surface level scorekeeping. It's actually an unmet need. Scorekeeping is rooted in a fear and a need that you haven't said out loud. So if I catch myself, for example, keeping score of who initiates sex, which is definitely something that I've dealt with in my relationship, the deeper question, the deeper thing that's happening is, do they actually want me? Am I doing all the reaching? Am I doing all the work? Am I wanted? And that's exactly what's happening here with Anaya and Casey. Casey has been telling himself this story that I'm the backup. I was the default. It wasn't her first choice. I'm not her type. And weirdly, Anaya is also telling herself the same thing. I'm the backup. I'm not the first choice. They both did a really bad job of proving to each other that they were in it because they're both waiting for the other person to kind of show first. But what they're doing really wrong here that I don't want you guys to do is they're collecting evidence of like who wins, right? Who picks who more. And in doing that, they both lose. And obviously, here Casey does end up in a couple, Anaya is single, but at the end of the day, no one has ever felt more loved because their partner won the argument or won the scorekeeping, right? So just know the second you keep score, you've already lost. If you catch yourself doing this, I want you to look inward and notice like what is actually coming up for me? What do I really need here? Because scorekeeping is not the way to do it. If you're keeping score, you've already lost. In a healthy relationship, also know that both partners will put in enough effort so that neither person feels like they have to keep score of anything, right? If there's anything I want you to keep score of, it's the positives, not the negatives. That's going to do way more for your relationship. Okay, moving on to lesson number 2, and that is focus on facts and actions, not fantasy and words. Okay, this is about Kenzie and how all the other women in the villa reacted to the live stream of the heart rate challenge that they did when the boys got to go to Casa and meet all these new women. So, Kenzie, I don't like her. She's not perfect. There's a lot of things I don't like about how she talks to people and how she treats people. But one thing she does get right is that she focuses on actions and facts over words. The second she saw how Corbin acted in Casa, which is like the fuck boy that he is, she decided to move on. She got to know several new guys that came in for, the girls. They had 12 guys to 6 girls, and she ultimately coupled up with Dylan. She also did this with Zach in week 1. He didn't choose her back, and she literally has not talked to him since from what I've seen. And look, I've liked Kenzie less and less as this show has gone on, but Kenzie holds herself to the high standards that the other women talk about holding themselves to, but don't. She's able to do this because she sees with her own eyes how Corbin was moving and then makes decisions based on current information, not how she feels. I don't think she and Corbin had a deep connection, but even if they did, I think Kenzie would have chosen to move on after hearing him say that their connection was out the window and watching him with the Casa women. The lesson is when you focus on someone's behavior, things get so much clearer. And I feel like this lesson has popped up every week in different forms because as the viewer, we see what they see and more. In this season, Melanie, Anaya, and Kata also saw their guys act way too excited about the Casa women. They were also upset, and yet, because they had strong feelings, they still chose to be with these guys, even though they knew potentially more trustworthy, respectful, and mature men, came in as new options for them. So, in your dating life, if you don't like how someone behaves, you have a choice. You don't have to settle for it. You're not on a reality TV show where if you get kicked off, you lose your chance to win $100,000 or like get a shit ton of money in sponsors. That's not your life. You have the choice to walk away when you don't like repeated behavior. So, when it comes to standards, I want you to take a page from Kenzie's book. And if you see something you don't like, don't just be like, well, I feel so great about him or our connection, the sparks I want to try. Like, no, that's it. Kenzie, you get one strike and then you're out. And I think I would like to see daters move that way a little bit more because we give people way too many chances sometimes. All right, lesson number 3, and that is don't ask your date about their other connections. So this is about Jen and Gal. So Gal is a guy who came in to the villa, was one of the 12 guys, and Jen asked him if he was interested in pulling anyone else for chats in the villa, and he said yes. And she was disappointed and began to feel insecure. She was upset that Gal was also interested in Kenzie, who was her best friend in the villa. When Jen did this, I was yelling at the TV, like, no! It was too early to ask this question or check in on their connection, and Jen did not do herself any favors by not exploring connections with other guys. Of course, she eventually did start warming up to Ronnie, who I actually really like and wish he stayed instead of Gal, but I really feel like she chose the guy that she's going to end up chasing. How does this apply to real life? Well, this is something I see all the time. People are like, well, should we talk about other people we're dating? Like, how should we talk about exclusivity? My advice is don't talk about your other dates and connections in early dating. The second you ask your date about other connections, you take the focus off your connection with them. Spend more time getting to know them not checking on who else they're seeing and who they're talking to and how their dating life is going. When you start talking about your other dates on a date, you start to friend zone the entire connection, right? That's something that you're going to talk about with your friends. Instead, work on actually fostering the connection, building chemistry, flirting, showing interest. That's going to get you further, not asking for validation like, hey, are you talking to anyone else? When you're not prepared to hear if the answer is, yeah, actually, I am. It can really backfire. So just don't do it. Okay, lesson number 4. If you're mad and you're upset and they say it was a joke, run. Don't even get me started on Zach. So this is about Zach and Kata and just Zach in general. On this show, I think Zach is one of the most insecure, manipulative men, and there are a few of them that we've seen on the show. But Zach said this in response to when he was called out for his comments during the heart rate challenge that the girls were watching and how the boys behaved during the heart rate challenge. We all saw it, but he was like, I was joking," instead of owning up to it and apologizing like a man. What I want you to take away from this is that this defense is a huge red flag. And people who say this in real life will rarely, if ever, take accountability and apologize when they hurt your feelings. Imagine you are talking to someone who you're getting to know or you're in a relationship with, and you say, hey, that comment actually hurt my feelings. And they're like, hey, you're being too sensitive. I was just joking. There is no way you can repair with that person. There's no room for understanding. It is just, you're sensitive. I was joking. Don't take things so personally. And they get to walk away while you're still hurt. That's a horrible dynamic. And if you're dating anyone who does that to you, you have to shut that shit down or walk away. In general, Zach is so problematic to me. Like the way he was treating Kata before Casa Amor started was also very alarming to me. I forget what they were talking about, but there was a moment where was trying to repair with him, be like, hey, give me a hug. And he was literally pushing her away and being like, I want to go talk to Bryce. It was so hard for me to watch that. I feel for Kata. I feel like she is way more pure in the heart than Zach. And I'm worried about her. I'm worried for her. I'm worried for her heart, to be honest. And I'm really wondering if Kata really doesn't see it or maybe she's just trying to win the game. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. All right, and this brings me to our last lesson, probably my favorite lesson from this week for my favorite connection to talk about, and that is perfect on paper can't be a toxic attachment. So let's get to Melanie and Sincere. So what happened was Melanie and Sincere during this week both explored other connections. Melanie was chatting with Corey and Sincere was chatting with Amora, but ultimately they both decided to come back to each other and stay loyal. During their recoupling, Melanie chews Sincere out. She really lays into him about his behavior. She yells at him. She's so pissed. She's not happy about their coupling on many levels. And I feel for her. I get why she didn't choose Corey. We'll get to it. But when I watch their arc, like Sincere and Melanie together, what I see are just two people who are trying to heal old wounds with each other and they're just stuck in this toxic cycle. If you're unfamiliar with this concept, we often choose partner who we recreate old unhealthy dynamics and patterns with in hopes for a different outcome so we can heal those old wounds. Obviously, I'm speculating based on what the editors allow us to see, but this seems to be what's going on here because these two are just tied together by this toxic cyclical attachment. Sincere is going to keep questioning the connection for whatever reason. Melanie is going to keep giving him chances. Sincere is going to keep lying to protect her feelings, and she's going to keep warning him this is the last time multiple more times. Even when both Melanie and Sincere were presented with two people who could have coupled up with and started fresh with, they still chose their toxic dynamic. Guys, this couple is not going to make it. I think we all know that, but they don't seem to. Why? Because of hope. And I think hope can be very dangerous in relationships. So, Melanie, back to our lesson, Melanie said to Corey, as she was choosing Sincere, she says, Corey, like, you're perfect. You're everything I want in a guy, but I choose Sincere. And she chooses Sincere even though she knows that he lied to her. Corey hasn't done anything wrong. Corey, in her words, is perfect. Everything she wants in a guy. And this is where I want you to take the lesson. If you're listening to this podcast, you've probably been on the receiving end of a text or a comment like, "You're so amazing. You're everything I'm looking for, but this just isn't the right connection or something is missing." Well, while every case is different, we can see through this situation with Melanie and Sincere what's going on the other side of that. Sometimes the person who's saying that to you, who's telling you, "You're so amazing, but I just don't feel the connection," they're still hung up on a toxic ex or connection, and they're comparing you to that person and that connection. They might say something is missing, and that thing is sometimes the anxiety, excitement, and the chaos that they might be mistaking for chemistry, love, and sparks. So I'm just saying that because you can be literally the whole package. And if someone is craving the toxicity of a prior connection, it's just never going to work. And that has nothing to do with you. It's just part of dating sometimes. And I'm really curious to see how this is going to end. So those are my 5 lessons. I have a couple other thoughts here though on this week because it was crazy. I do wanna talk about Anaya a bit more. From what I've seen, KC is pretty slimy. I really don't like how he went about choosing to move on from Anaya. There is no problem with dating selfishly, and that's what you're supposed to do. I mean, you're supposed to find someone you actually like and pursue that person. There's nothing wrong with that alone. It's just that more that Casey is a bad actor. He's transactional, he's hung on to resentment, and he all but admitted to giving Anaya lip service so that he could feel better about exploring. There is a respectful way to do it, but what he did wasn't. It wasn't respectful at all. In fact, most of the guys were not respectful except for Bryce and Caleb, who didn't even have a connection to go back to in the villa. But back to Anaya, she's so upset about not being picked by KC and never stops to think, does she even want to be picked by a man like him? This is why I talk so much on my podcast about being the chooser, not trying to be chosen. When you're so wrapped up in who's choosing you or not, you forget to think about why you even want them. I also hope that everyone who watched this and who's listening to this can see how important it is that when you're the chooser, you're also choosing yourself and realizing that when people are bad for you, even if the initial connection was strong, your best option is to move on. Obviously, we aren't seeing everything, but the story in the edit is that Anaya believed and hoped it would work out because she just wanted to be chosen by him. She hoped that he would come around. She wanted that romantic moment that Trinity and Bryce had. I mean, who doesn't? That was so sweet. But what I wish I could tell Anaya is that sometimes all the work in the world will not make a relationship work. It's not worth it. She won't hear this, but I know that you are, so I hope that you can take that lesson instead. If you're in a situation that remotely resembles what Anaya was in, where you feel like you're working so hard to get someone to see how amazing you are, you're working so hard to get someone's affection, attention, and acceptance and reassurance, it's not it. It's just not it. You are so much better off alone than trying to convince someone that you're worth it. And in Anaya's case, she would have been better off choosing Carl. So, okay, those are my thoughts. My predictions are that Jen, Gal, Caleb, Jaden, Corbin, and Paramita will be gone pretty soon. I think Anaya will be gone soon, depending on what happens with how the vote goes. And then Casey and Tierra will go, Kenzie and Dylan will go. And I think Melanie and Sincere, Kata and Zach, Trinity and Bryce will make it to the end. At this point, it will be amazing to see Trinity and Bryce win. I think they have a chance, but I don't think any of these couples will stay together following the show at this point. Let me know what you think in the comments. And that's all I have for you today for this week's Love Island lessons. Stay tuned for next week when I'm back with more insights from this wild, crazy show. See you next time.